So, good morning, Thor. How are you?
I'm good. It's a good day in Iceland. The sun is shining, and the wind is down. So,
Oh, that's excellent. Good to see you, by the way. And thanks for agreeing to have a little chat with me about the ongoing eruption. It's, of course, a big thing. Loads of people are interested in it. And I thought I'll have a little kind of pick your brain session today with you.
my
So thanks
pleasure.
a million for agreeing to that. So if you're okay, I'll plunge in with the questions.
Sure.
So, first of all, the previous eruptions over the last decade or so in Iceland, they happened in very different places. And some people ask about the Reykjanes Peninsula. So this is a somewhat different system to the central Iceland system. Can you say a few words about that, how this connects to the kind of overall volcanism on Iceland and why the eruption happens there?
Yeah, it is a very different setting from the volcanoes that we normally hear from Iceland. So most of those volcanoes are actually in the eastern volcanic zone, which is at least based on people's interpretation, a young propagating drift zone. So that's where you have extension and the magma comes up because the plates are moving apart in opposite directions. Now in the Reykjanes Peninsula, it's quite a different structure or tectonic situation because the Reykjanes Peninsula links the Reykjanes Ridge, which is the extensional system out in the ocean, southwest of Iceland, and the rift zones that go across Iceland. And so it basically is the link between those two systems. And because of that, it is what we refer to as a transfer. Basically, it's a kind of a strike-slip situation where one plate is moving, laterally in to the east, and the other plate is moving laterally to the west. So they're basically moving like this. Yeah. And there's a little bit of an extension associated with it, which opens up pathways from magmas to the surface. And so that sort of is the reason for the magmatism there.
That's very good because I heard some people saying on television and in the media that, oh, everything on Iceland just separates and splits apart. But to my mind, that was a bit oversimplified. And I think your point here is also that here we're actually looking at a much more complicated, a strike-slip situation, basically a transition from the onshore setting to the offshore setting, and a much more complicated situation.
Yes, in a sense, it's what people call leaky transform.
Yes,
it's the name for it. But in effect, this is the same situation as we have for the San Andreas, because San Andreas is a transform.
Yes, yeah. I see.
And it's a transform partly superimposed on continental crust because you're subducting the.
Correct. And
the
of
ridge
course, we
underneath
don't have big volcanoes coming up in Los Angeles right now. But I mean, there was a movie about that now.
Well, they made a movie about it.
Exactly. So maybe it's going to become true. But it's certainly true for the Reykjanes Peninsula. Now, I mean, it's very close to Reykjavik, actually. I mean, within a reasonable distance. Is there any problems for Reykjavik?
Not at the moment, not huge problems. Bit of pollution,
sure,
but it's much more the spectator aspect of it. It's interesting to see people are seeing the plume and for a period of time they saw the lava fountains from Reykjavik. There's a beautiful photograph of the cathedral in the main cathedral in Reykjavik, and you can see the tower of the church. And the lava fountain next to it. I thought that was kind of a pretty spectacular.
I saw that on Twitter, and it was spectacular indeed.
Yeah, it
and
is.
You kind of realize how proximal the two things are, the city.
But Reykjavik could be more exposed in the future, though. See, because on the Reykjanes Peninsula, based on the data that we have, we seem to have these eruptive periods, which last for 200 to 400 years. And then they're separated by 500 to 1,000 years of no eruptions, just tectonic activity. So last eruptive period on the Reykjanes Peninsula ended 800 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so this eruption most likely signifies an onset of a new eruptive period. So there's the likelihood of having eruptions on the Reykjanes Peninsula in the near future are very high. And the other thing we know is that all of the systems on the Reykjanes Peninsula become active during these eruptive periods. So we could actually have eruptions at sites which are not necessarily closer to Reykjavik, but more vulnerable, or make Reykjavik more vulnerable to the effects of the eruptions, like in this Bláfjöll, where the ski resort is, for example. Yeah, so or you could have eruptions out in the shallow ocean, and that would produce maybe more tephra, and Reykjavik and the airport could be affected by tephra.
Yes, of course. And then there's several tourist centers in the area, like the Blue Lagoon and things like that, which is a big financial kind of issue, I think, for Icelandic economy, to my understanding. I mean, all of this could actually be, not necessarily serious in terms of casualties, but it could actually obstruct things quite a lot. At least that was my feeling. There's a
number of really important infrastructures that are under threat from potential future eruptions. And you mentioned the Blue Lagoon, and there's also the geothermal, the power plant.
The power plant that supplies
Reykjavik next to the Blue Lagoon, which also would be under threat. And there are very important pipelines that go from that power plant. And we have very important both electrical cables or electrical lines, and also hot water pipes that supply the whole of Reykjanes, the biggest population center out in the Reykjanes Peninsula outside of Reykjavik, with both electricity and hot water. So if those go, then we have 18,000 people without water and electricity. Town of Grindavik also is located in such a place that it could become directly under threat from lava flows. And Grindavik is one of our most important fishing hubs. It generates a lot of money for Icelandic economy, and it's very important for the Icelandic economy. So all of these things are actually under threat, and this is something that we do need to think about and consider. And so there is an ample effort underway now, setting up experiments on, in relation to the current eruption, to try, for example, different things in terms of diverting the flow of lava from towns and maybe another direction, things like so, building dikes, etc., and walls that might protect those infrastructures. So we are in the process of setting up those kind of experiments, and really, and even saving the pipes, put things around the pipes and build up the area around the pipes in such a way that the lava goes over it. And then we also got to monitor how the heat transfers down into it. And so there are a number of things that people are trying.
Actually, yes. Wow, I mean, Iceland is a pioneer in terms of lava flow kind of control, like the Heimei 73 effort. I was always impressed as a young student about, chilling the lava flow with water when the fire brigade came. So I think you might need a few more kind of innovative ideas there to kind of cover all these aspects.
Oh yeah, but we're thinking about them. Yeah, I think we probably are among the leaders in this. But Japan, we can learn a lot from the Japanese. They have done a lot of things, especially when it comes to pyroclastic flows. But you can use the similar concept, and of course, the Italians in terms of Etna and Hawaii in terms of Kilauea and in relation to Hilo, and those are all sites where these things kind of have been tested out before. And so that's a very valuable information and experience that we get from there. But each place has its own situation, and they're different. So we need to think about different things as well.
Absolutely. Then one of my next questions I have is the supply situation. You touched on it already a little bit with the leaky transform system, but I was wondering, can we say much about where the magma comes from? I picked up a lot of almost a bit speculative kind of notions on the internet, and I'm not entirely sure. Some seismic says there was magma storage in the crust. Other people say some signals seem to tell us it comes from the mantle. What's your take on that, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, this is the way I see it. I mean, I think there is ample evidence that the magma is coming from a storage zone that is reasonably deep.
Okay.
So somewhere in the 15 to 20 kilometer depth.
Yeah. Which is pretty much the lower crust upper mantle situation. It's the transition in this part of Iceland, isn't it?
Yes, it is very close to it. My interpretation would be that it is in the lower crust, and that's based on geophysical studies, which indicate that the crust mantle transition in this area of Iceland is about 19 kilometers depth.
Okay.
So that based on some geophysical measurements, experiment, that they ran along a line along the west volcanic zone out towards the Reykjanes Peninsula. Some people are claiming that this is well below the pressure Mojo. I don't really know what that means.
Yeah, I was a bit, yeah. Well, on the other side, let's face it, this is early days. I mean, this is usually, it's like in a murder investigation. At the beginning, you might have a lot of suspects, but at the end, it might boil down to a very small number of them. So
my understanding of the Mojo is that it represents some kind of a physical change in terms of properties. So that's why I say I don't understand what pressure Mojo means. I mean, if you assume that the Mojo is at a fixed pressure or a set pressure in certain areas, I don't know how you derive that even. But let that alone. So I don't think this magma is coming from the mantle right now. It's not coming directly from the mantle. That would not be my interpretation of things. Of course, it originated in the mantle, and it is a magma that was produced by melting of a depleted mantle. I don't think there's any questions about that. But I think also taking into account that we've had no eruptive activity for 800 years in the Reykjanes Peninsula. I'm sure the mantle melting process did not take a pause for that kind of a period of time and was started up a few months ago. I think it probably is a more sustained process, and at least that's my view of it. So one of the likely scenarios is that we were producing melt by melting this depleted portion of the upper mantle, and it's accumulating in the lower crust. And when we had these plate movements that took place in February and into March, which was indicated by all these tectonic earthquakes that we had on the Reykjanes Peninsula, and most of them are strike slip earthquakes. There is some extensional evidence of extensional movement as well, and especially north-south, east-west extensional movement related to north-south fractures. And so basically, I think what happened is that you had this storage zone, which is slightly pressurized, overpressured at depth, and it was building up, and it was probably building itself up to an eruption, gradually. And then you have this, plate movement And that plate movement basically opened up a pathway for this slightly pressurized reservoir, and magma started trickling up.
That's fascinating because, strangely enough, I published a paper end of last year on some Scottish volcano, the Rhym Complex, which is a mafic complex. And it sits on a strike slip fault, and it's a layered pluton. And I speculated that each time the fault moved, we might have had magma coming up and then depositing one of these major layers. And that the pressure buildup inside can only be released, or was only released, once the fault moved a little. And of course, I likened it to the North Atlantic situation, which is connected. So I'm actually fascinated now that this seems to be potentially an ancient analog for what's going on right now on the Reykjanes Peninsula.
Yeah, and of course the magma comes up, it starts to accumulate, and early on, the signal is swamped by the tectonic activity, the plate movement. But then, the magmatic signal comes in and becomes stronger as this injection from this deeper reservoir or storage zone becomes more prominent, and you start to accumulate, into some form of a dike. This magma, and it also, what we know is that it stalled roughly at 1 kilometer depth. Seemed to have a hard time actually going beyond that, and it was for 2 weeks it was basically at this depth.
That makes a lot of sense. That's what I see in my old Pluton as well. The magma is not coming all the way through. I don't know why this is, but I'm fascinated. Yes. So what's your gut feeling? Why would it store there? What's your working hypothesis?
Oh, well, I think it's just a density difference. I mean, you're getting into the very, shallowest part of the crust, where you have, both, lots of jointing. There's a lot of void space in there. And so there's, that part of the crust is just too light.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense.
And of course you got, hyaloclastite. It's more stratified. There's everything that is, sort of I shouldn't say more stratified, but I should probably say the stratification creates more contrast in the properties of the rock sequence in the upper kilometer than it does further down. And so, yeah. And what happened then, and which I think is actually one of the more remarkable parts of the story. So on 19th of March, we had the eruption started. It was right around 10 o'clock in the evening or so. And we rushed out, and we managed to get a drone up in the air. And so we actually caught the early lava flows, etc., coming down there. And got some quite spectacular footage of that. And it was all on very short cracks. So you had 10 vents erupting, but each one of them was on a short crack. Meaning short, we're talking about maybe 10, 20 meters long.
Right. And they were in one line, or were they offset?
They were in echelon.
Oh, echelon offset. Okay, yeah, yes. Very good. Wow.
But the other thing is that those were at different elevations, and each of these cracks, there was no fountaining. It just lava oozed out basically with a little burst of bubble bursts or gas bubble burst every now and then, and it just oozes out. But there are different levels, and we noticed this later on, is that even adjacent vents, which were slightly at different height, they kept the difference in the level of magma within the crater throughout. And as the eruption continued, there was these two vents that eventually everything concentrated on in Geldingadalir. The southern vent, the lava always stood about sort of anywhere between 5 and 10 meters higher than in the northern vent. So here you have two adjacent vents with two different levels of the lava in them, and they're not connected. They're independent.
It's almost like I don't know, maybe I'm thinking too wildly here, but it's almost like that it's different pipe systems that might connect
Yes.
somewhere at depth, but actually in the upper part they are independent almost.
Yes,
So,
they are. So it's basically like what happened there is that, nature just put stuck straws in the southern end of the dike, and that's where the magma is coming up. So
wow.
In the beginning, we had up to 6 straws, which were extending down into this dike at a sort of roughly maybe 500 kilometer depth or something, 500 meters to 1,000 meter depth. And then in the end, a few other straws died out, and now only one of them is active.
And that, of course, makes a lot of sense in the context of your notion of the fault opening, the cracks that are opening. They are actually controlling how much magma can rise from any given point within the magmatic system and how this is sustained. So therefore, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Great. I realize we're running a little out of time because you said you have something else going on. So I have 2 or 3 small questions left. So I'm going to shoot quite wildly, if that's okay. The other question here I have is about the spectacular lava features, but you just touched on that because the variety of different textures and features that we see is probably connected to these different vent systems.
Yeah, one of the most amazing thing about this eruption is that it basically magma has been oozing out at the same rate since the beginning. If it changes from 6 to 9 cubic meters per second, I don't think that is a significant change. So it's sort of been hovering in this 5, 10, 15 cubic meter interval from the beginning. It didn't start with big spectacular fountains. It didn't have a really high peak of magma discharge in the beginning, and then fall off and then sort of gradually die out. It's just kept that constant production rate throughout. And hang on just a second. Another spectacular thing about this is that we have seen a very dramatic change in the vent activities. We started with a very few, up to 10 very short points in the first day that concentrated on 2 vents, which were active for almost a month. And then we started forming number of or series of new vents through small cracks propagating, sort of stepwise to the north. And it got concentrated again on a single vent, where it is right now. And which I think is actually quite remarkable. You see those changes and associated with these changes in the vent, number of vents active, their location, etc. We also see changes in the style of activity, especially when it got concentrated on one vent. Then we started to see continuous fountaining, with actually quite spectacular fountain, and that then went into a period of sort of intermittent fountaining. Every 5 minutes to begin with, and went up to every 10 minutes, and now it's still doing this intermittent activity, but it's more splattering, because the level of lava in the crater is so high that the fountains can't actually break through, and it just splatters in all directions and keeps building up the cone. All of those changes in vent activity took place without any change in the overall magma discharge.
Whoa, that's kind of exciting.
It is. I mean, it's amazing. Now, on top of that, all these changes in the vent activity have no influence on how the lava is behaving. So there's a steady discharge to the lava, and that's through a subsurface channel, because we don't see it. So this periodicity in the activity, nothing happens in the lava river in between. So you get this really spectacular fountain episodes with lava gushing out, and there's no change in the lava river at all.
Wow.
It's just like it's superimposed on it. And so you have this, and this lava now is sort of you got a little lava ponds that are delivering lava in all kinds of different directions, but also at a steady rate of eruption. So magma discharge is roughly constant. The flux in the lava out to the lava is reasonably constant, even though locally it can vary from one place to another. Just because how you're draining it. When you put 60% in this pathway now, and 40% into that one, and then you change it, 50-50 or whatever, so you can change the local flux. And what this lava has done at constant magma discharge is it has produced all known basaltic lava types that we know have been formed above, have been formed on land, I should say. It's simpler. So all the lava types that we know of have been produced on land have been produced by this eruption at a constant magma discharge.
That's peculiar. We're learning a lot about things, and actually they're rather unexpected, to be honest. So
yes, so it's a thermal budget. It's how the lava retains heat or how it loses heat that determines the types.
Okay.
Magma discharge apparently is a second order
phenomenon.
Yes.
Here we go. Wow. This might rewrite the textbooks. Oh God. I have two small questions left, and I try to be as quick as I can. On YouTube, there's loads of activity showing images and footage of the eruptions, and there's some folks that are describing minerals. And one of the biggest kind of clue I learned from YouTube was some people think there's diamonds in the lava. Can you quickly comment on that, Thor?
I haven't seen any diamonds, and there's no reason to think there are diamonds in this lava. Probably is referring to the feldspar crystals that we see.
I think so too, but I wanted to kind of just get the specialist view from the horse's mouth. I think there's loads of plagioclase. There's olivine. I've seen in thin section, or in microscope images, I've seen some pyroxene, but that's the main things. I mean, diamond would also be tectonically a bit unusual. It requires a very deep mantle source. So, but you haven't found any diamond then?
No, you're right. There's chromite, olivine, pyroxene, and plagioclase.
Okay, oxide. Yeah, chromite oxide. Okay, great. Then my very last question, and this is something that a lot of people ask. Do we know how long the eruption will go on? Do we have any feel for when it will stop?
Well, we don't know how long it will last. It can end tomorrow, or our not ancestors, but our siblings might see it well into the future. I don't know. I mean, it could last one day or 100 years. That's the range that we sort of are playing with it. My gut feeling is that it's going to last for years. That's what my feeling is, that this is just going to continue for years. I think we are. Well, how long it will last really depends on how big the storage reservoir is. Mm-hmm. My feeling is that's a fairly big reservoir, and we just pinched a little hole in it, tiny little hole, and magma is just seeping out of it slowly. And as long as you keep that little hole open, I think it will continue to come out. And so, yeah, years is my gut feeling.
Then I might still have a chance once my vaccinations are done. I'm looking forward to this. So great. Well, thank you for taking time. I know you have an eruption at your hand, so I really appreciate that you took the time to speak with me. And I guess it's time now for you to move to the other meeting that you mentioned. So thank you, Thor. We'll be in touch, and all the very best, and enjoy the eruptive activity as long as it lasts. So.
I will do. I mean, this is a beautiful eruption. I've really enjoyed it so far. I fully intend to continue to enjoy it.
Sounds fantastic. Thank you very much. All the very best, Thor. Good luck. Bye.